Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast with Ali Rock. Mehdi Ansari is a partner at Sullivan and Cromwell in New York. He serves as co-head of the firm's IP and technology group and the firm's artificial intelligence practice. He focuses on advising clients on a wide range of transactions and has worked with companies in industries including pharmaceutical, tech, sports and entertainment, telecom, and finance. Mehdi's story highlights the value of getting out of your comfort zone, prioritizing clients as the ultimate strategic advisor, and working hard. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, Mehdi, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ali. It's great to be here.
I am super excited to dive into your career. I usually start things off with an icebreaker, but in just reading about you and preparing for this interview, I really just enjoyed learning about you. You've accomplished so much since graduating from Berkeley Law. I mean, you're a partner and co-head of the firm's intellectual property group and the tech group and the firm's AI practice. So you've done so much since you've been at S&C. So instead of doing the typical icebreaker, I want to ask, what's been your favorite deal since working at S&C and why?
That's a great question. It's hard to choose a favorite because a lot of the deals have different stories and twists and turns. Some of them made waves in the market or in their particular sector, but some of them which may not have been newsworthy were actually really interesting because of the people and the scenarios. Generally, I've learned, at least from my personality, the deals where I get to spend a lot of time in person with folks, both our client and the other side, sort of being in the trenches together, are my favorites. They often are hard, like in the moment. There's a reason you're in person is because something needs to get done quickly or it's very complicated. You got to bring all the stakeholders together, but you often develop great bonds with, again, your own, S&C colleagues, the other side, your own client. So those are my favorites. One to mention was, years ago, I'm a big soccer fan. And so years ago, we did a deal for Bayer, the German pharmaceutical company, and it was very complicated and required a whole bunch of in-person meetings. And Bayer couldn't think of a space big enough to house everyone. It was really sort of 4 or 5 parallel negotiations. We needed breakout rooms. So there was need for a space with like 20, 30 rooms.
Wow.
And the idea they came up with, which was really cool, was Bayer, the company, owns a famous soccer club in Germany called Bayer Leverkusen.
Wow.
And it was in the off season. So they took the floor with all the suites at the stadium and made it the meeting and negotiation room. So each of the meetings was inside a suite, like facing the soccer field. And
Wow.
we'd go over different rooms, and it was sort of, we had access to all the coffee machines and everything that suite goers get access to, and it added a little bit of fun. It was a couple of players, although it was off season, came on the grass and practiced and kind of did their own thing while we were negotiating. So that's probably one of my favorites, on top of the fact that we ended up spending a lot of time together, and Germany is a cool place to spend time at. So overall, it was a lot of fun.
That sounds incredible. I mean, it really sounds like you value the relationship building aspect of the deals. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of people do, but I think different people's personalities um, respond differently to different parts of the job. But for me, being able to spend face-to-face time with people and grab coffee, grab a drink, maybe after negotiations, is one of the more enjoyable parts. And being in person allows for that a lot better than, Zoom and phone calls.
Totally. That's awesome to hear. Well, I love talking about deals. I mean, you've done deals with really industry leaders like Bayer, you mentioned, Intel, Major League Baseball, AT&T, Volkswagen, Citadel, Amazon. I mean, the list goes on. So we'll get back to deals in a bit, but I want to start off the podcast by highlighting your career journey because it's really inspiring. So we'll bring it back to your time at Berkeley. You're a double Bear, so that's what they call folks that went there for undergrad and for law school. So you were studying as a STEM major. So I'm curious, as you were studying for your degrees, what made you want to go to law school?
It's a great question. Yeah, it's a long journey. So I was at Berkeley studying electrical engineering and computer science, called EECS, and loved it. I love engineering. I still do. I'm a math nerd, and that's always with me. But I'm a talkative person. I'm asked a lot of questions in class. And one of my professors in one of my classes, my third year, my junior year, I did well in his class, and he asked me to do research with him on the side, which was great because a lot of times if you got good research, that could serve as a pathway to go to a graduate program. And I really at the time wanted to get my PhD in electrical engineering at Berkeley. So I was very excited about it. And I started to do research. And truth is, I found it really boring, and I wasn't very good apparently at hiding that. And so the professor who had asked me pulled me aside and he's like, "You don't seem to be really enjoying this." And I was like, I don't know why. Like, I like the substance so much, but when you do a research project, often in order to make a difference in the landscape, you choose something relatively small and narrow that you do a lot of research on and you make an improvement to. And I just didn't find things, that much work into something that small, that motivating. Just that was my personal. And so he said, listen, you like technology, you're a talker, which wasn't that common among engineers. You ask questions. Have you thought about the field of IP at law? And which is something I've never thought about. I'm a first generation immigrant. My English was still improving a lot at the time, but I'm not a native speaker. So law school was not on my radar at all.
Wow.
He introduced me to a professor at Bolt at the time, Berkeley Law, and he said, go talk to this guy, go sit on one of his classes. That professor was very generous. I sat through one semester of classes and really liked it. And that sort of started the journey of thinking about law school for the first time, talking to a bunch of friends, a bunch of research, and yeah, decided that I was going to give it a shot. It was a bit of a risk, to be honest. I'm lucky and glad that it worked out. But in hindsight, knowing what I know today, I probably would have spent a lot more time actually thinking about it and researching it. But just at the time, I really wanted to go do something after undergrad. And given that I had kind of ruled out engineering, law seemed like the obvious other option.
Love that story. Yeah, I mean, you didn't take a gap year, which it seems like is kind of uncommon. So it seems like, yeah, you only had those 3 months before the time after you graduated to when you started law school. And what's interesting is you graduated from law school in 2008. So before we get to that, though, I do want to ask, like, what was your experience like in law school, and how did you find the academic rigor compared to your STEM degree?
Um, I found it super hard, to be honest. I think electrical engineering, computer science, like looking at the whole thing was more difficult, but I was more comfortable with it because there's a lot of math, there's a lot of things that I've just done my whole life. But as an engineering major, I wasn't a big essay writer, and it wasn't a thing I enjoyed. It wasn't a thing I was particularly good at. And that's all law school is. It was a lot of reading, so you have to write good essays. And I also found the grading frustrating because in engineering there is a right answer, and if you get there, that's great. And if your work is correct, you get full credit. And if you don't, you can kind of see why you were dinged. But with you know essay responses, you weren't sure why. You were like, I think that's the right answer, but the professor didn't quite like the way I explained it. I don't really know why, but I didn't get the highest score. I found it very unsatisfactory and kind of loosey goosey. And so that was frustrating. And the first semester, I remember like feeling very anxious and thinking, did I make the right decision? This doesn't seem to be my thing. But as with other things in life, you kind of persevere and you grow and you gain the skills. And then second semester on, it was much better. I think, I don't have a lot of lawyers in the family, so the whole concept of reading cases and developing your own summaries and briefs wasn't a thing I was familiar with. So that took some time, I think, in the first semester to just iron out the kinks and figure out. For some cases, I had taken far too much notes, so my summaries were too long and not helpful. For some other cases, I hadn't focused on the right thing. So second semester, just a lot of those things were ironed out. And then, yeah, I think second and third year were much more enjoyable, frankly, because you've done your OCI, and maybe you have an offer. Grade still matters, what I tell everyone, because you don't know what your career is going to look like. But somehow the pressure felt less, and you also get to choose your classes. So I think second, third year, I liked law school much better than first year, and in particular the first semester.
Love that. I want to double click on your point about good grades. Obviously, you're a partner at one of the best firms in the world. So, what sort of advice would you give to folks that are interested in becoming associates after they graduate law school? What kind of things should they be doing?
Coming from a great law school like Berkeley, I think almost everyone will be able to get a good job at a firm. But, depending on the kind of firm you're interested in and the kind of practice, it can be competitive. And, because law firms, for good and for bad reasons, don't do any kind of substantive evaluation of associates, right? Your on-campus interview process, there's a little bit of, they might ask a question or two, but it isn't like somebody gives you a fact pattern and is like, oh, write a memo or analyze this, right? It's more or less sort of social. Grades end up being one of the only pieces of substance that law firms have. Again, for good and for bad, I think, because they're not always the best determinant of how good of an associate somebody will be. But so as a result, if anyone is interested in certain types of law firms that are competitive, grades matter. Similarly for prestigious clerkships, it's the same. Obviously personality matters. You have to interview well, but a lot of times the grades are kind of what gets you in the door. So the advice I would give is, although it's not, you shouldn't kill yourself because there's lots of career opportunities. And for a lot of people, firms like Sullivan and Cromwell are not what they're looking for. And so you don't have to worry as much. But if you are interested in these sort of more competitive options, I think focusing on grades, unfortunately, is probably the best advice. Now, that doesn't mean at the expense of enjoying and participating in all the other activities that law schools offer, journals, practical labs, and on the ground type of experience. That's all great. But if I were to redo it again, frankly, myself, I think I would even focus on my classes and grades more and let those things kind of come in second, third year. So you have just like a solid base for the grades. That's probably my best advice. And the second thing I would say, just law school in general, is think about what the kind of career you want to have. If you want to be a corporate lawyer, transactional lawyer, take some classes that are helpful, right? Take securities, take antitrust. I think most people should take IP these days, especially a law school like Berkeley, which has one of the best IP curriculums in the country, because it's hard to be in the modern economy and not know the basics of corporations, securities, corporate taxation, IP. They're just going to come up and you'll be better for it. I didn't always do that actually because I wasn't totally sure what kind of lawyer I wanted to be. I took a lot of IP because that was an area of interest of mine. But if I were to redo it, I would probably invest more in securities, corporate taxation, things like that, which I ended up picking to the extent I needed to just at the firm. And that's fine. You're not going to learn everything in law school, but I think it would have been helpful if I had taken more kind of corporate practice type classes.
Gotcha. Really great advice. Yeah, it sounds like grades are table stakes, and that should be a huge focus, but also exploring areas of interest is also important to just sort of see like what you want to do after you graduate. So
Right,
that's
exactly. And there's lots of options, right? I'm sure a number of your classmates, you know, may not want to go to a big New York firm. They want to do something else. They want to do public interest. They want to do government. They want to do other opportunities. And while grades could still be important to a lot of those, they may not be as essential as, like I said, clerkships and certain law firms who just have to focus on them in the absence of anything else.
right. I want to ask you one more sort of macro question before we get into your career. And that is, I want to ask you about the value of a JD and how you see that either increase or decreasing, especially with the prevalence of AI.
Oh, that's a great question. I think I'm of two minds because on the one hand, I think a law degree is very useful. But if you have intentions to utilize it in the right way, if you're going to go work for a law firm, go work for, again, a nonprofit that really utilizes the law degree, I do think there's some pockets, I don't know to what extent it still happens today, but among my friends, there were some pockets who just kind of didn't know what to do in their career and just kind of went to law school thinking, it'll just be a good kind of general purpose degree. and then ended up working at, their dad's construction company or something. It's not worth it, right? It's a huge investment of time. Law school has only gotten more expensive. And so unless, either you have to use, family resources or you have to get loans, it's a huge amount of money. I don't think of it as like, oh, I couldn't think of anything else, just like go to law school, it'll be useful in life. I don't agree with that. But I think if you're going to practice law, really focus on practicing law, it's a fantastic education. You'll meet a lot of colleagues. What effect AI will have on the practice of law, I think it's jury's still out on that. You're starting to see little nibbles around depending on the type of work you do. I think AI is likely to take some work streams out of the practice of law, hopefully most of it for good, reviewing large data sets or trying to find a needle in a haystack, much easier done by AI than it was done by, hundreds of hours of work. But on the other hand, it is potentially a displacement factor for legal jobs in general. I think, like I said, the jury's still out on that. The legal field is not unique in that. There's lots of professions that may be affected by AI. But I tend to be an optimist on these things. If you read about 20 years ago, a lot of my colleagues would spend hours a day at the printer, because they had to print these documents in particular formats and check them. That went away. And you could say like that work stream was eliminated, but it's not like we have less lawyers or less work for them. We all up leveled and we do more and we do things faster. So it's possible, and I hope it's likely that AI will be an accelerant in a similar way, but it's hard to forecast until we kind of play along and see how it goes. I do think for law students in this day and age, it's important to be familiar with the AI tools. Just like, when I was coming up, you learned how to be a good researcher on Westlaw and Lexis and how to use the right strings and how to put the right keywords, etc. Just being a good user of AI systems, I think will be a core competency for all of us going forward.
Really interesting. I love the glass half full perspective. Now, I want to talk about your when you graduated in 2008. I want to ask, how was that for you?
It was a tough time. I mean, I got lucky because patent litigation at the time and generally, IP was a very hot field. So I don't think my career prospects were, materially affected by it, but it was a time of economic turmoil. A number of my friends, I remember there was a firm in San Francisco called Heller Ehrman, which was a very good firm, a firm I had thought about. They had very, very good track record. Some of the smartest kids from Berkeley Law accepted offers there, and it went under. And a lot of those guys didn't have jobs, and it was just the luck of the draw, right? Who ended up there? I don't think there was anything you could have known about it. And a lot of those guys, although they were really smart, they came to the market looking for jobs was because the economy was in such a bad state they couldn't find any, and their career prospects changed drastically. They had to take the kind of jobs they didn't want to because they wanted to do something, and then now you have a track record doing that thing, so the only kind of offers and opportunities you get are along that same path which you didn't want to go on anyway. And so it was a tough time. And I think in hindsight it could have worked out a lot worse for me, but I got lucky because of my engineering background and my interest in IP and how hot IP was. It was fine. I found jobs and came out after it. But I do find that just mentally, it left something on me that I think some law students sometimes forget, which is just remembering. I remember I put a lot more focus on stability actually as a result. I didn't start at Sullivan and Cromwell. I came here a year after law school, but one of the reasons I came was that, it was a firm that hadn't done layoffs in '07, '08, and just seemed like a really stable platform. They hadn't grown very quickly, but as a result, they didn't have to lay off and lose people very quickly. And I ended up placing a huge premium on that because I could see around me how many of my friends, their careers changed because of the firms they were at. And so, but some of those memories now I talk to, associates, they don't know, they don't remember, like sort of memories are short. but it did change. I think a number of my classmates who came out that year, it changed the way you think about career planning and security, especially in those early years. Now it would be different because I've done a lot of work, so I have a track record to get other positions should something surprising happen to SNC, which I don't expect. But when you're a first year associate, you haven't done anything. The firm goes under, or if they lay you off, it's not like you have some depth of experience to market yourself with. You're pretty, you're blank slate. And that presents a really hard kind of career progression challenge. So I think focusing on a place that trains you well and is also a stable platform for the first few years of your career, if you're going to a law firm, is one of the lessons I learned coming out of that time period.
Amazing. I love that. And in our past conversations, you've always spoken so highly of SNC about the training and the program and just the type of people you work with. So it's always nice to see, how confident you are and where you work at. Um, I do want to talk about life as an early associate. So, what was your involvement with deals early on? Like, what did the day to day look like, and how was that learning curve to actually learn the day to day of what it takes to be an associate at a law firm?
I think of law firm practice at least as primarily an apprenticeship model. Law schools kind of give you the tools, but especially for transactional lawyers, law schools don't do a whole lot to actually, and I think they still don't, although they've improved in this regard. They don't do a whole lot of preparing you to be a transactional lawyer. You're not very useful when you arrive. And so a lot of it is doing, observing, asking questions. At times it felt overwhelming just because there's so much coming at you. There's acronyms you don't understand. There's some people don't know how much you know or don't, so they like throw things around that you don't know what you're talking about. And so I think being at a place where I would go to associates with questions, I would spend time researching and reading. And so, yeah, it's a growing period, but I found it enjoyable. It was busy, but that's what you want, like I said, because at that point in your career, you're a sponge and you learn by exposure and by just being in the stream of things, even if half of them you don't understand. But just being on the call, being on the deal, hearing people talk about it, there's just so much you absorb from that. It's one of the reasons why I always encourage junior associates to, whatever firm you're at, try to go in person as much as possible. There's so much learning that occurs not directly through the substance, but by just dropping by somebody's office before a conference call starts, after a conference call ends, the sharing of reactions, impressions, being able to, chat about an issue instead of having to email or just put whatever you think in a draft instead of running it by someone. There's so much learning through those interactions. So that was my experience. I thought it was good, but it is hard. It was a lot of hours. It was unpredictable at times. And so there was some of that also you're getting used to. The other difficulty I had early on is, because I went straight through, I had done some, summer jobs and stuff here and there, but some of my kind of birthing pains those first couple of years were also just learning how to be a professional, which would have happened no matter what career I went into. I didn't have great email etiquette. I didn't know what you were supposed to do. Like I remember Googling because somebody would be like, "Dear Mehdi." I'd be like, "What am I supposed to put dear for everybody?" Some people put a comma, some people put a colon, some say best. This guy said cheers. Like how do I figure out what my style is going to be? I remember I was an over user of exclamation marks in the beginning, which I think is sort of a hazard of my generation, maybe yours as well. There was a lot of thanks exclamation, hi exclamation, and I learned like, wow, most people aren't doing that, and I started to realize, yeah, okay, maybe that's not super professional. I should tone that down. So there was a lot of those first couple of years where you just learn. I was learning just basic professional skills, and so I think to the extent you have people who've gone straight through without kind of professional jobs, that'll probably be their experience as well. And law firms are aware of that, and we have training and programs to help people with that. But if you have folks who have worked before, I think that part will be easier because I was both learning how to be a lawyer, but I was just learning how to be an adult.
Right, because you were a KJD, right? Which
What's
is
a KJD?
it's like an acronym for kindergarten through JD with
Oh,
zero.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I hadn't really I'd gone straight through like everything. I hadn't taken any time off. And by the way, I know you mentioned that earlier. That's another thing I would do differently about my career. I'm not unhappy that I went straight through because it means you kind of, you get to different milestones in your life at a younger age. But I would have taken it a year or two off in between to either just focus on a passion project. Like, for example, I always loved economics, just liked the discipline. I never had the opportunity to study it systematically, but to have done a master's in economics before I went to law school, now in hindsight, it will be a lot of fun. Because the truth is, once you start law school and you go to a firm, you kind of get on this treadmill and you obviously can jump off and you can do other things, but the opportunity cost starts to feel really high. And now you're like, well, I could take 2 years to go do a master's in economics, but I'm leaving all this income. I'm creating a gap in my career, and I just think most people don't. So it's kind of a golden opportunity before going to law school to, if you're just going to travel around Europe for a year, I would have done a couple of years of random things in hindsight.
Very interesting. I'm actually curious about the master's in economics. Why not an MBA?
No, I mean, I would have done an MBA. So what I did in law school, I hope they still offer this, but back then when you were at the law school, you could take classes at all the other professional schools without any kind of approval or whatever. And I used that generously. I think every semester, second, third year, I had at least one class at Haas. Because to your point, I was like, I always liked that stuff and it was free. It was available. You didn't have to get admission to the business school. It was great. And so I took a lot of classes. I think I would have liked it. My impression at the time, which I think is correct, is actually MBA is more useful actually if you've worked a few years. For somebody like me who had gone straight through, you can sit through the classes. And I mean, I did sit through a number of them, but it doesn't quite hit. When you take a class on organizational behavior, which is one of the classes I took at Haas, if you've been in a big organization and you've seen the difficulties, around groupthink, around, again, organizational behavioral issues, the lessons you're learning hit much better than somebody like me who half the time was like, I don't really know what the problem is we're trying to solve. Like, I theoretically understand it, but I haven't faced this before. So I probably, in hindsight, I probably wouldn't have done an MBA unless I had worked before. Then I think it's a great degree. But just economics was a passion project of mine. I don't know if this course is still around. There was a law and economics class at the time that was jointly taught at the law school and at Haas. And it's one of the more fun classes I think I took in law school. Because also it had a little bit of math to kind of reminded me of, undergrad, and that was fun.
Nice. Love to hear that. I want to double click a little bit more on associate life. I mean, you spent 7 years and 7 months before making it to partner, which is, I think, fairly quick. But I am curious about, first of all, what does it mean to make the effort as an associate? You kind of touched on this a little bit. And how did your responsibilities change as you spent more time at the firm?
I think of the associate career, at least here at S&C, but I think at most places, sort of three different stages. There's the junior, mid-level, and senior. This is before you make partner. And there's similarities, but there's some big differences between them. I think in the junior year, I think the biggest focus is just like I said, learn, expose yourself to as much as you can. Don't be afraid of things you don't know. Don't turn down a deal because you've never done one of that kind before, or you're here. Joint ventures are complicated. I did that as a junior. Sometimes I would avoid some of those things, but actually I learned that the better thing is to do the exact opposite because it scares you and it's hard. Dive in. It scares everyone. And imagine becoming an expert in something that everyone else finds hard. That's a really valuable skill and differentiator you have. So I jumped into things that were hard, but I think as a junior, the most important part is to put yourself in the stream. As to like what competencies you need, I think just being diligent, being on time, taking responsibility, taking ownership. I think a lot of people forget that like you're a full lawyer. You're a junior associate on a team, but like you're not there to help people. Like it's your deal. Try to take responsibility for it as much as you can. You'll need help from other people, but organize the work streams, think systematically about them. You can get help from people, you can get advice from people. But I find sometimes junior associates are in the mode of very reactive, just like whatever the partner asks, they'll do, but otherwise they're not poking their head into things. I would recommend the opposite. Like just think of it as your deal and everyone else is there to support you, but stick your head into everything. What's going on I know I'm not managing that work stream, but like what's going on over there? Ask questions. I think that those are all great, but just being diligent, being on time, and just doing the work correctly is the main thing you got to focus on in that junior year. When you become a mid-level, some other skills get added because one, you're now managing people below you. And so you have to learn how to manage timelines. When the client asks you for a draft of something on Friday, how much time do you need to review? How much time do you need to give the associate to review? So maybe you ask them, it's Monday, you ask them draft on a Wednesday so you can build in some back and forth time. You don't want to be too crazy though. If you ask for a draft Monday night, right? You could do that too, but the juniors will start to hate you when they realize you were sitting on it for 5 days because you didn't send it until Friday. So you have to learn those skills, how to give enough guidance and support to help the junior associates be effective, but not so much that they're not learning and you're micromanaging them and they're not actually exposed to the difficulties because that's how you learn. And at the same time, your role is growing. Partners now expect you to run work streams on your own. You come to them with questions, but you're like running the diligence process, you're handling the diligence call, you're negotiating reps and warranties, like you're really doing stuff. And I remember each of these transitions for me were very difficult, actually. Like going from junior to mid level and mid level to senior, it was very anxiety provoking. You all of a sudden feel like you're doing things you don't know well enough. Like, oh man, like, I remember when I became a senior associate and the partner I was with was super busy on another deal, and I just had to run the deal. And I remember being like, I don't know how to do that. Like, I've never done this. It's sort of like I'm biking without the extra wheels, but like nobody told me this was going to happen this quick. I'm not ready, but you got to do it. And it's a little bit of sink or swim, and it feels chaotic at times, and you get support, but you come out of it. So that's the mid level. The senior experience is similar, but now you're managing bigger teams and you're often leading transactions. Partners are looking, they're still available. You'll go to them with questions, but they're actually more reactive to you a little bit sometimes. If you're doing a good job, they're going to let you run with things. Oh, he's negotiating, he's talking to a client. You want to go to that meeting? Yeah, go for it. Maybe I'll come, but I'll kind of sit on the side. So, senior associate, and you're often the number of deals you're on in each of these transitions grows a lot. As a junior associate, you're on 3, 4 things at a time. As a mid level, you're on 7, 8 things. As a senior associate, you might be on 15 things. And that kind of juggling of deadlines and figuring out how do I fit all these things into my schedule, those are all kind of new skills you learn. And you start to work a lot more as a senior associate on how am I presenting? Do I give the client comfort and calm? What kind of negotiator do I want to be? Am I a sort of calm negotiator? And there's lots of examples you can choose from. By that point, you've seen a lot. Am I the pound the table kind of negotiator? Am I the calm negotiator? What kind of style do I want to have? What do I find effective and enjoyable? And so each of those, I think, present different challenges. I think the thing that's consistent through all of them is, and I think this is true of all law firms, is there's a high expectation of, quality and dedication to what you do. And that kind of taking ownership of projects, taking ownership of work streams, I think is a very valuable skill that I learned, along the way. But I wish I had known from the beginning because I think I would have learned even better and faster as a junior if I had thought of my role more expansively than just, I do the thing that people ask me to do, but otherwise I'm just sitting at my desk.
Got it. What a great synopsis. Thanks for laying all of that out in such detail. Love just the themes that you always talk about, especially yourself, of just exiting your comfort zone and taking ownership. It sounds like those are two things that you really live by. I want to move on to the partnership. How did it feel to make partner?
I felt great, as you would expect, but I never intended to be a partner. Interestingly, like when I joined the firm, I have a background in engineering. If you had asked me at the time, I would have said, listen, I'm going to be here for 2, 3 years. make some good money, pay down the loans, you know, had gained some good experience and probably go in house, or even possibly, all my friends were doing startups at the time. Like I might have gone in a non-legal role to, a tech startup. And I thought about a lot of those actually along the way. So it wasn't like something I was targeting when I joined the firm at all. Evaluating options, very kind of openly thinking about other things, talking to different companies. But just as it turned out, I think I ended up enjoying the law firm more than I thought I would, like this role and this kind of work. Although it certainly has downsides, the hours, the unpredictability, there's things, but that's true of every job, right? There's if you find a job that's all gravy, you should take that. But most jobs come with some good and some bad. And the overall package of a law firm, I was happier than I thought I would be with. And so it wasn't until around my sixth year, fifth, sixth year, where I started actually seriously think about, hey, could I make partner? Like, would that be appealing to me? Because honestly, before then, it wasn't an active thought. And then at that point, when I decided, then you kind of have this 2, 3 year sprint where, and I think it's true for most firms, depending on different timelines, where, you really have to show your stuff and you're under the microscope. Everybody's looking at everything you do, not just was the thing done right, but was it done in the right timeline? Did the client feel good about it? Did we reach the right outcome? How did this person handle a stressful situation, conflicting deadlines, a crazy client sometimes who's asking you unreasonable things? And you
Wow.
can kind of tell they're testing you a little bit. Sometimes partners intentionally would pull out of situations. So make me handle it on my own and just see how I would do. And so it was a stressful time period, honestly, because you feel like you're being evaluated all the time, and you are. And at least at S&C, the way it works, and firms diverge in this regard greatly. They give you some indications of how you're doing, but it isn't like I didn't know the day that I found out whether it was going to be a yes or a no, honestly.
Wow.
If you had told me, I probably would have said maybe a 60-40 yes, but it was kind of like that. I wasn't like, oh my God, I'm a shoe in, or I'm dead in the water. I just kind of really didn't know. So it was a very pleasant surprise in a way. And I remember feeling very happy. I like ran home and saw my wife, who at the time lived across the street, and then came back. And it was just sort of it feels like a great culmination of, 8 years of work. And so yeah, I was ecstatic. At the same time, it comes with a lot of responsibility. In order to be a successful partner, there's that now that's another transition where instead of doing work, which you still need to be doing and doing a great job, you're responsible for generating work, developing clients, expanding client relationships, and there's a whole bunch of skills there that I didn't have that I had to learn. I think the models have changed. Some law firms now, have requirements regarding, before you become a partner, you have to have clients of your own, et cetera. S&C wasn't like that, isn't like that now. But so some of those skills I had to learn later, and that comes with its own positives and negatives. But yeah, overall, it felt, it felt great, and especially at a firm that I had spent almost my entire career at, and frankly, I had evaluated lots of other options and consistently thought S&C was the best place. So it felt very good at that time. It felt like something I worked really hard toward. And, here we are 7, 8 years later.
What an inspiring story. You got me fired up, Mehdi.
I'm happy to hear that. The thing I tell a lot of associates who, we have summer classes every year, and some folks ask a lot of questions about what's partnership like and how do you make partner, and there's this many first years come, but there's only that many partners. How does that work? And I think those are all fine questions to ask, but I frankly think focusing on the first few years is more important. Focus on the training, focus on the environment, the people you're going to be working with, the kinds of deals you're going to be doing, because there are so many unknowns and you'll have so many opportunities to evaluate and think about these things. Like I said, for me, if you had told me as a third year, where will you be in 5 years? I would have bet good money that I would not have been at S&C or at a firm. And by the way, I was in the Bay Area at the time too. So in the middle of this, I moved to New York, which I for personal reasons, but I couldn't have foreseen that either. So if you had told me as a third year that I was going to be a partner at S&C in New York, I would have thought that's almost impossible, but just life kind of works out that way. And at least in my career, I've often thought long-term planning was a bit overrated. I think medium and short-term planning is more important. And as decisions come, try to make the best decision. And so you'll have these like branching decision trees, and you'll kind of end up in funny places. And because you couldn't have predicted from the beginning, but if every time you did your best to make the right decision, things often work out because you've made a series of right decisions, and who knows where you'll end up.
Amazing. I love that advice. So I want to get into a little bit more of the specifics of the deals and then we can wrap. I want to ask sort of a hardball question. And the question is, how do you say no to a client?
It depends on what it is they're asking and the kind of relationship you have with the clients. We've done so many deals where our client wants to be really aggressive on an issue. And I often tell them, listen, this is your call at the end of the day, but I just want you to know we're way out compared to market practice. And I think if we put something on like this on the table, they are likely to put something like that on the table. So, given what I know about the deal, our business circumstances, I would advise not to do this. But it's your call at the end of the day, right? It's the client's decision how they want to handle a deal. And a lot of times, because we tend to work with the same clients over and over, we have kind of long institutional clients, there's a lot of trust built already. And they often take your advice, like they're here for your advice. And so they often take your advice or they share with you something that you weren't aware of that actually makes their decision make sense. It's been rare in my career where I really thought a client was doing something wrong that I disagreed with. Now there is a different line at some point, which if you have a client that's not listening to you and is doing like illegal things, there are going to be ethical obligations at some point that I might just resign from that representation and say, listen, if you're not going to listen to me and you're going to do these things, I can't be associated with this matter. I can't be associated with this deal. And that hasn't happened to me, but I've heard of situations where that has happened. But for the most part, it's just a relationship of trust. And I do think as good lawyers, our job is to advise our clients. Like a good lawyer isn't the one that's just a soldier. That's just a client says, go run through this door. And you're like, yep, I'm running through the door, right? Most of the time, our clients want advice, want consultation. But once you give that and a decision is made, even if one you disagree with, then you have to run through the door for your client, right? And so I
Gotcha.
think that's the balance. And it's one of those things that it's one of those skills that I think you learn more as a mid-level and senior associate, which is because in the beginning, clients are gods, and kind of when they say something, you're like, absolutely, we'll do that. And then as you get more experience and frankly get a better sense of what's market and what's reasonable, I remember gaining that confidence to tell a client, listen, we could do this, but I would advise against this for these reasons. And you start to get better traction from clients that
Yeah.
way.
Is it fair to say that saying no to clients sometimes will even build more trust because you might be saying no to more business in some cases?
Yeah, 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 100%. And actually, I do that a lot because, like, we have clients sometimes who come to us with something that's just not in our forte. We are a big firm, but we don't do everything. And so the client's like, hey, can you guys handle this? I was like, I can, but we'll have to learn a bunch of new things. And given the deal size, for example, or this or that factor, I think you'd rather go with somebody else. Like, I can even give you a referral. And a lot of times when you do that, clients then really trust you when they come with you. They come to you with something and you say, yes, like this is for me. I can do this. They know that you wouldn't have said that otherwise. So that's a tact I've taken. Like I'm not the kind that I take on every deal from our clients if I don't think we make sense for it. And even including sometimes because of cost. Our model here at S&C is primarily geared at larger deals. And so the cost structure, the way we charge, we usually don't charge by the hour, for example, on deal work. We charge based on deal size, and we'll just kind of agree on a flat or an alternative fee arrangement. But if you're doing a really small deal, sometimes we'll do it sort of almost as a favor just because we have a relationship and the client really wants us to do it. But otherwise, you don't need, for a straightforward small deal, you don't need S&C. There's lots of other firms I could recommend who could do a great job at a much lesser price, and their model is just better set up for that. So I'm usually pretty open about having those conversations with clients because I think what I think you want in your career are long-term kind of trusted relationships, not just like, listen, I just want more money. So whatever work you give me, I'll take.
Gotcha. Love that. Let's talk about present day. So just before we sort of wrap up here, Mehdi, I want to ask, like, what are you doing these days as a partner at S&C? Obviously, you're the head of several of the couple departments there. So, what does your day to day look like? What are you working on?
Um, it's a lot of deals, right? I'm a deal lawyer at the end of the day. Any deal involving technology, IP, AI would be within our forte. I think different firms handle breadth of practices differently, but here at SNC, we have this generalism principle, and the idea is to try to be as general as you can within your field. And I've really tried to implement that, and I've enjoyed it a lot. Some of the clients you mentioned in your intro, I've done work with Major League Baseball and Nike, which are sports related, something I really enjoy. But I've also done work for Intel and pharma companies. I do M&A, license agreements, joint ventures, like all kinds of deals. So there's a ton of variety. And I actually find that really exciting. I think if I were to do even the most exciting thing that I do over and over and over again, I probably would find it boring at some point. So my plate kind of shifts a lot, just depends on what my clients are doing and what deal is happening. Right now, these days, there's a solid amount of AI work and advice and deals that we're doing. So that's a solid, you know, part of my work. And then a whole mix of consumer companies, semiconductor companies. That just happens to be the stuff I'm working on right now. I had a bunch of deals in the pharma space earlier this year. I don't have one right now, so I'm not doing any pharma at the moment. But it kind of shifts. And your role changes a little bit kind of as you become more senior. There's a lot of I still review drafts, review documents, but I rarely do the first draft of anything, right? One of the associates would have prepared it, I'll review it. There's a lot more calls, there's a lot more negotiations, discussions. There isn't as much like diligence or reviewing 100 documents a day. And although there are times I still review diligence materials that are important, and I think it's important to always do that. So the kind of work, the mix, how much time I spend doing what has changed over the years. But yeah, it's sort of a general plate of IP, technology, and AI.
Love it. I love it. This was such a great episode, Mehdi. I mean, just the themes that really stuck out to me was getting out of your comfort zone and taking ownership. Any last imparting words on the audience, on folks that are really trying to become lawyers, trying to enter an industry like this?
No, I mean, I think you captured it honestly. I think stepping out of your comfort zone, and I know I mentioned S&C has this principle of generalism, but I think it's good for everyone. There is a tendency, I think, in the modern day legal market to over specialize. There are lawyers I know who do what I do, but only for like semiconductors, or their expertise is only open source software. And if that's something that's uniquely interesting to you, I think that's okay. But my advice would be to be as general as possible, because one, you'll give yourself broader career options. You'll learn a lot from other principles and practices that you can borrow. So there are times when, something we've done in the pharma space, it's actually applicable in other spaces, but for some reason in other spaces, people just aren't using that tool. And you can become a better lawyer by being more creative that way. I find it more interesting. And I also think one thing importantly that it does is that constantly stepping out of your comfort zone, you build the muscle of not being afraid of diving into new things. This idea of I can figure this out. I figured out 100 things I didn't know. I can figure out a new industry. I can figure out a new deal type. I can, with sufficient time, I can research. I can talk to the right people. I can figure it out. And that itself, I think, is a super valuable skill, whether you're at a law firm, in-house, etc. which is a person who doesn't always say, yeah, that's not what I do exactly. Like my comfort zone is this small and everything out here I say no to. You just learn to go, no, I can figure that out. Yeah. So I think, and I've seen in my career, people like that tend to succeed a lot, no matter where they are. So my general advice would be to the point you made is to stay generalist, stay out of your comfort zone, jump into new things, because I think all of that gives you tools for future opportunities.
Love it. Love it. Really inspiring stuff and great advice. Thank you so much for being on the episode, Mehdi. I really appreciate it.
Of course, it was my pleasure. Good to talk to you, Ali.